hard copy. Did not print you all out copies, I only have a couple. So kind of pay attention to who you're following. So anyway, I should say my name is Tess Steffinger. I'm a professor teaching hydrology over at the Citadel, and I have 2 sections of the class this semester. So they don't actually have class together. So I was going to say the transitions between slides may be a bit rocky. Not everybody knows everyone, but they have been working on this presentation jointly. So I'm excited to see what they have to say. And generally for today, like the overview, we're going to do a background on stormwater management and talking about how we calculate peak runoff and why that's important. Talk a little bit about the infiltration project at 10th on East Arctic. And talk about possibly, including some of that flooding a little bit further up between 9th and 10th. I know Eric had mentioned trying to figure out how that might work. And then also talking about just different solutions for localized flooding on the island and propose a couple recommendations at the end. So that's the general plan, and we'll get started. So,
Guess I'm going first.
okay. I will prompt people in the back if I have to.
So, what is stormwater management? Stormwater management is the process of controlling rainfall from storms. It allows engineers to collect and redirect excess rainfall, which helps prevent flooding and damage to infrastructure. It also helps improve water quality by reducing the number of pollutants found in natural water systems. Why stormwater management is necessary? 2, I already said it helps prevent flooding, and it also improves water quality by reducing pollutants in water systems. It also, another important reason why it's necessary is it supports groundwater recharge, and groundwater recharge is the process where rainfall is infiltrated into the ground, and this refills underground water supplies, which help maintain long-term water storage. It also supports erosion control, and it ensures compliance with regulations like the Clean Water Act, and it allows engineers to get NPDES permits, and NPDES stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System.
Hello, my name is Tyler Scherer. I'm a former property manager and residential contractor and resident of Folly. I'm here to talk about STRs and flooding's impact on the community here. I won't go too deep into STRs. I know it's a touchy subject between communities here, but it would be wrong to deny the revenue streams it creates here. And part of that process of creating those revenue streams is the experience that the guests go through. And usually when the guests have that experience, the local residents have that experience, and it transcends into our communities. And some of these issues are the parking overflow and the traffic disruption that happens. I know that when these flooding events do happen, there's typically a reduced amount of traffic on the island, but even so, some of the standing water can be so deep that it's tough for emergency vehicles to get through. I'm sure these are things everyone here already knows. I think ultimately my goal for Folly is in the lower middle slide here, and that's the identity that we want to carry forward through to the world, really. I mean, Charleston's on a global stage now, and I think it's a real opportunity for us to become a beacon of sustainable infrastructure, and Folly's a great place for that to start.
Thank you, Tyler and Marshall. My name is Tate Sistar, and like these guys were talking about with the what is stormwater management and why it is important, now we're getting into the how we are actually managing the stormwater. And one important aspect that we looked at was peak runoff. So what is peak runoff? It's the highest volume of water that you're going to have on your site, or the highest velocity that water is going to flow during a certain storm, whether you are designing for a 5-year, 10-year, 100, whatever that storm is. Now, why do we want to use the peak runoff? Why is it important that we are looking at the peak runoff rate? Well, this decides the maximum flow rate during a storm event. You don't want to be going underneath that peak flow, because then you are going to have flooding. You know, you have that, if you are designing for something underneath the peak, you're going to have an overflow of water that is going to build up on your site and end up flooding your streets and flooding your buildings and creating that flooding. It also is very important for design and infrastructure, like we were just talking about with the storm back in December with the drains and the pipes. If you are designing for infrastructure below the peak, you are going to have 15 hours of trying to discharge that water as opposed to 3 hours. Now, there are two ways to calculate peak flow. The SCS method, which is the Soil Conservation Service method. Now, this method it's easier and quicker to the eye. It's mainly used for storm sewer design, smaller urban catchments, preliminary sizing, and kind of simpler regulatory checks. And on the other side, the rational method, which is what we used. It's what you use when you're trying to create a hydrograph, and when you need the total volume of runoff, which is what we are designing for. And the watershed studies, and it requires more data, but it is a lot more accurate in design. On the next page, there are two tables that we found that we use in our design. We pulled these from the Charleston County Permitting Standards and Procedures Manual, and we figured that this was an important two tables to add because we use these in our design.
So a little bit more about how we use the rational method, and kind of just some background on what it actually is. It's the formula Q equals C times I times A. So what that means is Q is going to be your peak flow rate, which is what you're trying to find. I is the intensity or the amount of rainfall that you're going to experience in the storm. And A is the drainage area. The C is the runoff coefficient. Now that's calculated, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more further. But it typically depends on what the layout of your land looks like, whether it's more concrete structure and sidewalks, or whether it's grassy or gravelly, whatever it may be, that runoff coefficient accounts for that.
Alright, thank you. So like my colleague said, when he was talking about a 25-year storm, 10-year storm, sometimes even a 100-year storm, that basically is the storm's occurrence based on its return period in years. So a 25-year storm has a 1 in 25 chance of occurring each year. So as us engineers tend to like to do, we design for the worst case scenario. Now that may hurt the budget sometimes, but I promise it's for a good reason. So we take that into account whenever we try to design these new infrastructures or pumping plans like we have on 10th Street. Now on the next page, we have a colorful graph here that represents each design storm. So we have, you know, the 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, all the way down to a 1,000-year storm. I promise we're not going to design for that anytime soon. But the graph here is a DDF curve, or a depth duration frequency curve. So here in the Charleston County, we tend to design for a 24-hour storm duration. And if you follow the graph for each occurring storm design, you can see that a 2-year storm brings about 4.6 inches of rain, 10-year, 7 inches, and it just keeps going up. So when we design for infrastructure, we usually plan for these type of variances in our storms.
Hello, my name is Gabriel. So I'll be talking more about the C value, which is the runoff coefficient. So for the rational method, the C value is determined based on the characteristics of the surface or the land where we're analyzing it. So basically what it means, a higher C value would mean more rain is running off, and a lower C value would mean more water is getting infiltrated into the ground. And we use this table. You can see it's table 15.2.3, where we can find the corresponding C value based on our return period in years, so for a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year storm, and depending also on the characteristic of the surface, as if it's a developed land or underdeveloped. And an example we did in the Taylor Hall, using that same table for a 2-year storm, we came up with a C-value of 0.58. And that's just basically analyzing the good condition flat area, the flat grass area, it's asphaltic, and also the concrete / asphalt roof. And continue on with the rational method. The A stands for the area. And so the area of the watershed. And how we determine that area, there's 2 methods. One is a manual mapping, so you could grab a natural map, locate like high points, and you can draw lines along. You can see like the image on the slide, and you draw lines along the ridges, so it shows like where the water is draining into. And then after that, after you have an area, you can overlay with the grid, and then count the squares to see what the area actually is. But that takes too long, and it's more complex, so we use software for that now. One is GIS, which they use DEM models, which is digital elevation models, that will do it pretty much automatically. You can also use CAD for that, and that's how you find the area.
Hello, my name is Darian Masofa, and I just wanted to introduce the infiltration project that was on 10th Street in East Arctic. As you can see, it's on a good day, it's a nice T intersection where people can drive through and enter the beach, but following that, we have pictures submitted by locals of how water can flood up into properties, and this can cause people to walk on their properties, cars can't get through, and it's just a general issue, and it was a good thing that we built a pump on that intersection.
So expanding on what Doria had said about the submissions from locals, the current project at 10th was created to provide a solution for this. So the solution is to reduce frequent roadway flooding along East Arctic Avenue and 10th Street by pumping the stormwater to infiltration areas in the dunes. So soil infiltration rate, available area, and drawdown time were analyzed and found sandy soils with high infiltration capacity, which is where they came up with the idea to drain it to dunes. The proposed systems include 2 pumps and perforated PVC pipes beneath boardwalks to dispose this water into the dunes. 2 pumps are going to be used. One main pump for when you have a regular high tide, but not necessarily a king tide, and then you have a backup pump for when you have a large rainstorm or a king tide where the roadway is completely flooded. The estimated infiltration and pump capacity is about 97 gallons per minute, which allows for removal of ponded water in about 2 to 3 hours roughly. So it's a lot better than what we have now. So if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see a picture that shows exactly how the flow is going to go from the road, getting the water to the dunes. You can see it pumps right near the parking lots, and it will pump it through the perforated PVC pipes into the dunes under the boardwalks.
My name is Russell. So now that we've kind of went through an intro of this project that we have on the 10th and East Arctic, we're going to just kind of get into the specifics a little bit. So this first slide you see is the topography. I put together a little map using some of the Charleston County GIS data, and you can kind of see I've drawn some arrows that show the flow, the direction of the flow. And this kind of helps to show us that at this intersection it's a local low point. And so it makes sense why there's always water flooding and pooling up in that area, especially when you combine it with a high tide. And so expanding on that, to deal with this drainage problem that we have at this intersection, the most limiting factor is the area that we have to go with. So obviously there's not a lot of public land around there, and I'm willing to bet that not a lot of people are going to be willing to give up their private property to accommodate this. So we're using the beach access the best that we can. And what Adura used for their calculations, instead of using the area and rational method, like we mentioned before, they instead used the total flooding area. So they went in and saw the total amount of area that was flooded, which was about 0.11 acres. And from that, they could calculate, using the infiltration rate of the sand, like we just mentioned, how big of a pump to the size. And they went with about a 98 gallon per minute pump. And then this ponded water that they went off of, it can get up to, I know some of the worst things that they mentioned were 6 inches of water, which is not safe for any motor vehicle going at the speed limit. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Grace Robertson. What you see on your paper is just a combined hydrograph. It's just to emphasize the difference in inches based off of the design storm. So obviously with the bigger design storm, you're gonna have a much difference in inches of accumulation of rain, but it's just a graph showing the difference between the years that the design storm is based off of and over a 24-hour span.
My name is Tyler Johnson. Introduce yourself. I'm Jacob Pullman. And so we're going to get into the numbers part of this project that we ran. So we had the base depth of 3.2 inches for 0.11 acres. So if you look at your sheet, you see we have an Excel file that calculated the storage that area held with that depth. And from there, we can figure out how long it takes for the pumps that are sized. So they pump 2.22 cubic feet per second. And we determine how long that water is going to be on the road. So for 3 inches of rain, it takes about an hour and a half in order to pump that rain pump that water off the road. The next slide, we have 6 inches of rain with an area of 0.21 acres. Now, how we came up with the 0.21 acres is we assumed that as the depth increases, the area increases literally with the depth as well. And so we kept the same pump rate and just changed the depth in the area. And so for that, we determined that it takes almost 6 hours to pump the rainwater off of the road.
And then furthermore, on the next one, see that we went with the depth of 8 inches. 8 inches is to be considered a severe storm. That's when you start seeing a little bit more infrastructure damage and pedestrians and civilians are affected more. Utilizing that same pump rate of 0.22, that proves a 10-hour time to clear that area. And then following that, for 12 inches of rain, utilizing the same linear function, you get 22.5 hours, which 12 inches of rain on water is when vehicles experience flooding. It's very dangerous and can cause a lot of harm to the community.
Yes.
Sweet. Hey, how you doing? My name is Patrick Saldivar, one of the veteran night students for the class. I'm going to be talking about possible solutions that are going to go along with our previously discussed situations here with the flooding. So the first slide you're going to see is something called a swale. If you're not familiar with that, it's just essentially a drainage ditch that's going to run along parallel with the roadside, running down to some form of other stormwater retention or removal infrastructure. The swale also, while that water is going to be traveling down, can also essentially eliminate some of the water flow through infiltration into the ground right there on the surface while it's traveling down to that drainage system. Some of the considerations of costs, obviously, any of these projects are going to come with a cost. Maintenance is one of the issues that would be a little more of a consideration here, so it would potentially create a bi-weekly maintenance period where we'd have to take care of the actual growth and everything else in there. Moving on to the next slide, so we have potential to tie into existing infrastructure. Through some of our studies, we noticed some pre-existing, didn't really get too deep into determining when the existing infrastructure was founded and constructed, but there are potentials to tie into those existing systems, just via movement of water. And then my final slide here is the dry well. We just these are just spitball ideas. Obviously, we're gonna throw everything against the wall. Dry well may not be so pertinent here in this location, based on the water table heights, but it is an option to allow for some further infiltration of the water in areas we can't try to reroute it. Permeable pavement.
So we've talked a bit about how rainfall can get into areas where you don't want it, or how flooding can cause some problems. So one of the main ways we deal with that is something called permeable pavement. There's 3 different types that we use usually: permeable pavers, permeable concrete, and porous asphalt. So what these allow is for water to actually get into the material. We want that infiltration because we don't want too much runoff in certain areas. Too much runoff can cause problems, just like the flooding and all those stuff. So you can see on this picture here, it's actually got like a lot of different layers to it, but it's not too complicated. There's in the middle, there's the coarse aggregate. So what that allows for is water to get in between the cracks there. And there's 2 videos there if you want to watch them.
Alright, so I'm going to be talking about under drains. So under drains are a drainage system that's subsurface, and they're typically just perforated pipes filled in with gravel trenches. So they're used to collect and remove excess groundwater or filtered water from soils and roads. So they're pretty cost effective. They're actually relatively inexpensive when compared to other drainage systems. And they're pretty easy to install. They require simple materials and minimal labor. But the problem is they're good for soils that don't infiltrate well, which is kind of the opposite of what we have here. And they also are designed to carry only clean groundwater, and so any sand debris would cause the system to fail, and that's not what we want.
Alright, so I'm talking about underground detention tanks. They're basically the same as detention ponds on construction sites. It gives a place for the runoff to go for the time being, so the water's not accumulating on the road. These are better for parking lots and non-beach communities, but they could work in beach communities too. You'd be dealing with a lot of buoyancy on the concrete tanks, so you have to do some tie-down anchoring to keep them from floating. And the cost varies a lot based on the size, the area, and the street requirements of the tank.
Another possible solution would be bioswales. This is where you take vegetation that's pretty absorbent of water, try to get into a channel so water can flow into it, so it not only absorbs the water, it can also infiltrate the water, and with working with underground retentions and under drains, it can also infiltrate the water into those drains. The benefits of this is it's naturally beautiful, and it can, like I said, it infiltrates the water and also retains it. And also slows down stormwater velocity, and it can also store water via evaporation. Some problems with the system is it requires specific site conditions, and it also requires high maintenance due to the plants. As well as it does not work very well with extreme storms, but with milder storms and medium storms, it works pretty well.
I'm here to talk about tree boxes. They're also known as tree wells, and they're basically mini bioretention systems that they combine manufactured devices as well as the natural vegetative systems. They double not only as a catch basin, but also they provide attractive landscapes. They cost about $6,000 each, but this is assuming that the drainage area is not too excessive. But they require very minimal maintenance. And they're usually used in sidewalks, which means the installation process is pretty simple and it's not super invasive. And because of that, the quality of the soil and the tree depends a lot on the effectiveness of the tree box. The soil itself should be designed to have an infiltration rate of about 2 inches per hour.
And then next we have rain gardens, which are depressed areas in a landscape that collect rainwater, and then that seeps into the soil. So they're usually placed in lawns or in excess pavement, and they are usually in residential development, so residents will develop them on their own. They usually cost around $10 to $25 per square foot, and they're around 100 to 400 square feet, depending on the residential lot. And they carry into infiltration rates around 2 to 3 inches per hour. The city of Charleston actually had a pilot program in 2023 where they would pay residents $200. And then they also have a 2-hour training course on how to set up a rain garden. And then there's also rain barrels, which are collection points that people place under gutters to collect excess rainwater runoff. They cost about $50 to $150, and they fill around 50 to 60 gallons each, having an infiltration rate of about 1.25 inches an hour.
I'm going to be talking a little bit about a water tower, potentially. So building an additional water tower that could be used to collect like the flood water or storm water from the road and send it to a water tower. You can use it as like a non-filtered or purified ways, like some irrigation, things like that. But if it was like, hey, we could purify it, we want to use it for people to have drinking water and whatnot to be added, then it could just be either before it was brought to the water tower or after it's stored, take it to somewhere, a treatment facility, to then use it for some sort of drinking water. But by storing it into the water tower, it can be off the road, which is help for safety, and then also used for many more reasons, kind of similar to the water barrels and stuff, that people can use it for their home or be used citywide, or to help like for drought, like to help how we were talking about earlier in the slides of keeping the water or keeping the ground with water in it.
So now for our recommendations. Our first recommendation will be to add some permeable pavement at these intersections. The good thing about the permeable pavers is that the infiltration rate is high, up to 100 inches per hour when first installed. Even when clogged, it says permeable pavement would infiltrate up to 3.5 inches per hour, creating a better pervious surface. One downside to permeable pavement is the high construction cost, where it's about $10 to $30 a square foot, and there's a moderate maintenance cost. It would be recommended that it is cleaned, vacuumed, or swept quarterly, even though typical permeable pavers are only cleaned about once or twice a year. Good thing about permeable pavement in this area is that the soil is very sandy, so infiltrate very easily even if it gets clogged with that sandy soil. The only dangerous part of that would be getting clogged by organic material, which could cause basically an impervious surface from that. Another good thing is it automatically increases your storage volume, so it gets that volume of water off the road and underground. Just think basically giant French drain under the road, and then you can reroute that water and send it to your sump pumps and get it off of the road and out back into the environment.
Good afternoon, my name's Daniel. Now, I know everybody up there, I know all y'all's heart jumped whenever he said it's expensive, anywhere between $10 to $30 a square foot, but there are grants involved that offer the installation of permeable pavement.
That's extra credit right there.
Is that all of yours?
Yep.
Am I closing both of these out?
No, I'll do three.
Talk about them together, because they're gonna go together. So I mentioned earlier about Folly becoming a beacon of sustainable infrastructure, and I think what ultimately we landed on as a class is that a combined effort of rain gardens and infrastructure work is gonna be needed. We drive down most of these roads here, and we see compacted soil, we see, it is a high infiltration rate soil, but a lot of these yards are not taken care of well, perpetuate the issue with runoff from their own. So, you know, how can we incentivize these homeowners to invest in things that help the community? You know, it may cost them things that they don't want to invest in currently. So some options I came up with, again, like Pat said earlier, spitballing. Just like the city offered financial incentives, so rebates or some sort of credit to buy in, maybe even a free plant program. I know they offer that on James Island.
So one more, like to round off all the recommendations, it's just kind of like a combination. So a mix of the pavement, a mix of the rain gardens, and just like where they would be used best. Or if both of them would be great in some areas. Or including like the retention basins or water tower, those to help with like larger, heavier storms, while the gardens or the pavement could help with like frequent, like low flooding times. But just with all of them combined, it's kind of like very well with the infiltration rate. Maintenance will be in there, and then the cost will fluctuate depending on like, hey, this area we think it'll need rain garden and pavement. So then, okay, maybe we might have to, it might be a little bit more, but ultimately safety is what we're going for, and people being safe. So that's the greatest.
And the vegetation aspect really does reduce the financial load that infrastructure is expensive. Seeds are not so much. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation so far.
Yeah.
I think we've reached the end.
And any questions?
I think you've hit upon something we're doing, or trying to do, is a combination of things. Along Center Street, we're gonna have a lot of natural, nature-based kind of mitigation solutions in place. So we're trying to stay ahead of that. It's always good to get new ideas. So I do appreciate you coming today and presenting this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having us. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, visit Folly, spend some money.
Yeah. Right.
You already did the hard parking, found parking, or
That's
hard
right,
parking.
yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, so we had, I mean, the Center Street project, you may not have really touched on much, but, you know, the final solution, I'm glad you guys are starting to see how, it's kind of a system of solutions depending on where we're at. And Center Street's a prime example. We have, you'll see a lot of parking up and down Folly, Center Street here will be the pavers, pervious pavers. We'll have that going on, which will actually, the idea of the engineers basically is they have reaction to pull water directly off the road as fast as possible and then have storage underground because we're an island and it's tidal. So we actually have the rain gardens too. So we'll have different, I think there's about 6 of them that'll be on Center Street. That'll take up about 1 parking space per, which is kind of like, oh, parking, you know, thing. So we'll have that as storage capability, and it's also going to filter. So it'll be a filtration process instead of just direct stormwater we have right now going directly into the marsh. which causes water quality problems, as everybody knows. So that'll be some filtration there. And then in addition to, like the mayor mentioned, the pipe diameter will be triple the size that we normally had, with additional storage capacity will triple underground with just those pipes, and then all the way out, going into the marsh area. But, yeah, it's a whole system of things. And we've experimented with some other rain gardens too. We got a rain garden out back here, if y'all wanna see it, behind City Hall.
Yeah.
That was installed. There's also another rain garden at the community center and another one at the Folly River Park. So doing some experimentals there, and there's a rain barrel, I think, at the community center too. So flooding is huge on the island. Any island you go to, flooding, and we've been reading the news about Isle Palms and Beach Road, and those are the two huge things we deal with.
I encourage you to, while you're here, walk around, look at some of the project that's on Center Street, but then go on to the side streets. You'll see some of the pervious pavers and so forth that have been incorporated to the right of way. So I've got homeowners that are actually asking about that now. DOT's kind of pushing back a little bit, but that I think would be an ideal solution for them. So, yeah.
Yep, let's take a look.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.